we're back for part two on how to plan an impactful conference or event. Let's jump back in.
So let me take a step back here, okay, and talk about marketing and getting people actually to the conference itself. Because I think that if we're able to look at that, it becomes a little bit easier for us to say, okay, how do we how do we do this? The whole question about, gee, can a sponsor bring X number of people? Okay, can attendees, bring others, etc. I mean, or particularly with sponsors and if you've got a trade show booth, how many people do they have access to the sessions and everything? I mean, that's part of what that sponsorship package might look like. But let's talk about the actual attendees for a moment. One of the ways of getting more people in is to use the list that you have. Okay, the members, the people that might have been members in the past that have interest in becoming a member, etc. This is a way for them to test drive. Who's attended at past events? Okay, that's another sort of source. Partners. Okay, so who are the people that have sponsorships or have similar interests with a similar audience, for example, that you might. Maybe you could do a special deal with, say, an allied association or organization that anybody that they have in their organization can get special friends and family pricing, if you will. Social media for sure. But there's I'll add one more. An early registration bonus. If you've got, for example, people who are in the conference, why not on the last day? And many conferences do this. I don't know why all don't. Why don't they do a bit of a rush and say, hey, here's where next year's conference is? And anybody who registers in the next 48 hours can get a bunch of benefits. Sometimes it's costs, sometimes it's non-financial benefits. For example, you could sit up in the front seat, or there's a special session just for the early adopters, or something like that, right? But I think that there's one thing that many, and I'm shocked by this, to tell you the truth, why more organizers don't sort of use this. If you're engaging a professional speaker, why don't you use them to help out in the actual marketing? Like, for example, for all of our clients, what we'll do is we'll make a 20, 30-second promo, like a movie trailer, okay, to get, the organizers can use to generate some excitement. Let people know this is what it's all about. Let them know that there's an actual person. It might actually be interesting. How about speaker webinars? For one association, the national conference, the registration was not going as well as they thought. So I said, listen, why don't we do this? Why don't I do a webinar a month and a half before, open it up to everybody at no cost. Now, from my perspective, I've done all the research and preparation for the keynote I was delivering. So the amount of extra work it would take for me just to deliver a keynote is just my time, right? Most of the cost of professional speakers, all the research and the customization and the interviews and everything like that. So in this particular case, we had 350 people that attended the webinar. They got some extra bonus value. And a good number of those people actually registered for the conference for 6 weeks later, right? So this is an example, pardon me, of how you could use the partners to actually get some interest in it. Same thing with discussion groups. I've been on a lot of private discussion groups for my clients, association, LinkedIn pages, and web-based discussion groups where there's a Q&A session that actually might happen beforehand, right? Where I can ask them questions and people can ask questions of me. And all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more interesting. And by the way, it's good for me as well, because on one hand, I'm generating interest. There's more promotion that actually goes out for the event. On the other hand, I get to ask individual people about some of their questions in my area of expertise. So I think that that's something that too often we don't use is well, people like the speakers to make a difference to the marketing and the engagement.
Good suggestion. I'll ask another question about marketing. People think about marketing, they think about that to-do list, that treadmill, social media, paid advertising, newsletters, the email list, all this stuff. But if we take a step back and think about the strategy, do you want to talk about marketing like to a persona? Like, who do we want there? What are their wants and needs and fears?
I think one of the biggest challenges that leaders have today is too often we're in this rinse and repeat world. And what I mean by that is that, well, we're going to take the blueprint of how we did it last year and we're going to rinse and repeat it for this coming year. And then we're going to do that again. And every single year, we make incremental changes with respect to how we actually market and actually deliver the conference itself. And I think that you got to do that. Incremental improvement is critical. And having a playbook and all the things that need to be done, that captures all of your experience running a particular conference. That being said, and I'll use your words, let's take a step back and say, what are the personas of the people that we want to actually have here? Is it executive directors, presidents, GMs, that kind of thing? Is it the finance people? Is it the younger people? Is it more men than women, women than men? Is it people in this geography versus that geography? If we create a number of personas and say, what do we have right now? Right now, okay, what's the basic makeup, if you will, according to these personas? And by the way, a persona is like a representation of a typical individual within a group, right? So, the demographics of them, the psychographics, and a few other things, right? How they make their decisions. And then you say, okay, so that's today. What do we want? What do we want? Okay. And then we say, well, we want more of this persona, more of that persona. And then you can say, well, how do these personas make their decisions to actually attend? What's the stimulus, the marketing stimulus that we need to do for each of these personas? There might just be like two or three that you look at. And once you've got that stimulus, you can say, okay, now we're ready to start marketing, right? Is the goal, for example, for persona X, somebody who's not a member, to get them to test drive the association and come to conferences? Well, what do we need to do to make sure that that person actually signs up by the end of it or shortly thereafter? If we've got, for example, a particular region that's never been particularly well represented, how do we, for example, use partners and use other types of outreach in that particular region to perhaps do better for that particular persona, and so on? I think it's useful to take a look at that, because all of a sudden you get some new insights, by the way, which also may speak to, who do you have on the stage? What kind of speakers do you get? Also, where should that, maybe next year, the year after, maybe it's got to take place in that area of the country where not so many people come, because it'll be easier for them to test drive. Maybe the structure of it needs to be changed as well. I think it's an exciting process to go through. The problem is that people like rinse and repeat, because we like to incrementally improve, which is what you should do, but sometimes you take a step back and say, new ideas, maybe they'll make a difference.
We could talk about marketing all day, but since I want to move around to different topics here, can I ask about panels? Okay. I personally find them hard to watch. A few people on the stage and they have to sit while they take turns. Sometimes they each get different questions. You don't even get to hear the same, ideas about the same topic from each of them. Like, what would you say? Is there like a good formula recipe for them to be successful?
Oh, gee, panels are really, really hard on the audience. You're right. Okay. They're also kind of hard for the attendees. Oftentimes, the moderator of the panel is just chosen randomly. Maybe they've got a title or they're well known, etc. And the amount of preparation needed to actually do panel moderation is massive, just massive. You've got to, on one hand, spend time with each of the panel members, right, to make sure that they're up to speed on what you're hoping to deal with. You've got to think about who's in the audience and how do you engage the audience when the panel is doing all the speaking. So what can you do, for example, to give everyone like if you ask a question, for example, of the audience, okay, raise your hand if such and such, if you agree with this, with such and such. And panelists, if you give them a paddle, okay, yes, no, agree, disagree, and have the panelists do that. And then all of a sudden the audience is engaged because they're answering the question too. And then they're hearing the perspective of the panelists on that very question, whether they come on the yes or the no side of it. That's a little bit more engaging. You have to construct the panel experience so that the audience is fully engaged. It's not just sitting back, checking your phone because, people are going, okay, panelists, I'm going to ask you this question. And then panelists 1, 2, and 3 answers. I'll also say something else. We need to make sure that the panelists have got some diversity in it. Older people, younger people, men, women, people from different aspects of the industry, different cultures, whatever it is. Because I think sometimes what we'll see is we'll have panels that are very, very, very identical, and the perspectives, as a result, are also identical and not very helpful for the audience, right? So I think we need to be very careful about who's on the panel and what's the perspective that they're going to give that's going to make it interesting, right? Most panel moderators have no idea about how to engage the audience in a way that's meaningful, right? So that's what we want to do.
I've seen the moderators like take up a lot of space and they're like emceeing hard and it's like taking time away from the experts. No?
Yeah, that's a problem, and it's a real balance. If you're an experienced moderator, you'll know that your role is to pull out the best, excuse me, of everybody who's on your panel. A very inexperienced moderator will think that they're also a panelist and they feel that they should be commenting on everything. In which case, if they truly are that way, maybe what they should do is they should be a panelist and get somebody else to moderate it. Well, what I will say though is this, you know, when a panelist says something, it's okay, done professionally, for a moderator to push them on it and argue with them. Or somebody says something that sounds reasonable, and for the moderator to say, well, I'm sure there's a number of people in the audience that are wondering, what about X? Okay, is that true in the case of X? And so that way the panelist is not just repeating canned answers, but the panelist is actually doing it. Or for the moderator to say, okay, not so sure about that. Other panelists, one and two, do you agree with what panelist number three was saying? Also say this, if you've got a 20-minute panel and you've got 5 people who are panelists, do the math. How much time will everyone have to speak? It's a mismatch. Okay. On the other hand, if you got 2 panelists and it's a 2-hour segment, that's also a terrible mismatch, right? So the question of when you're designing the conference as a whole, where do panelists come in, right? And where do the keynotes, the workshops, and there's a whole bunch of other types of really interesting formats now that you can choose from. Where do they all fit in? How do they make it so it's truly an exciting event, and not just yet again another PowerPoint, yet again another PowerPoint.
Randall, you mentioned earlier, we talked about earlier, sponsorships and the booths and what they get out of it. I want to talk about that money aspect. We see conference planners working hard to sell those sponsorships, sell those booths. It's reasonable. The event has to be solvent. Should the money that's brought in be spent on the event, on those big ticket, motivational keynote speakers, the industry expert speakers, or is this supposed to be like a little honey pot to last them through the year? Like what's
So,
reasonable?
so many associations, their business models in the past where essentially we've got membership revenue, and that's sort of where we're kind of breaking even or losing a bit. And then we have the annual conference with all the trade show booths and sponsors and everything. And that gives us a little bit of a kitty, okay, that sort of keeps the association solvent throughout the year. COVID sort of did away with all that. And a lot of associations became a lot more mature with respect to their financial planning and their business models and so on. And I think today meeting planners and association leaders are saying, listen, we've got to make sure that if we're going to do a conference, we provide an excellent experience for all attendees. By the way, all stakeholders, and that includes um, the sponsors, the trade show booths, anybody who's writing a check. Otherwise, if there's no great experience, if it's they won't come back the next year, the sponsors, booth people, or frankly the attendees. So you realize you're playing to a number of different groups, and that it's I personally it's sometimes frustrating when I'm approached to speak at a particular event, and you could guess what their budget is, and you could see all of the people getting paid. The AV people are being paid, the venues being paid, the food and beverage and the coffee, those people are being paid. Um, excuse me. But the only people who aren't being paid are the people who are up on the stage actually sharing the knowledge, which presumably is one of the big drivers for people to attend in the first place. And so those types of events I just don't go to. There's probably somebody else who's maybe trying to make a name, or maybe they've got something to sell who'll go and speak for free. But I don't do those anymore, and I just don't get it, to tell you the truth. Same thing with we're not for profit. That's right, you're not for profit, but still, everybody gets paid a salary. You're still paying rent, right? You're still paying the hotel, right? And so this is a problem because some speaker fees are ridiculously high. Mine's very much in the middle of the pack, right? And there's people with less experience than me that are even cheaper, right? But the question is what are you hoping to achieve in it overall? And gee, maybe by cutting out having a lesser variety of snacks at the break, for example, it may very well be that you could get a better quality, speakers and have a better quality experience, right? So I don't know. It's a very strange one, right? It's a very, very strange one. I don't get it.
Good point. Talk to us more about weeding through those speakers, the fees, the experience, are they worth it, the ROI, as Audrey asked in her question. Like, what should you be asking your speakers to weed out to get to what you're looking for?
Okay, so I guess number one is what are the objectives of the conference, and you want to match, okay, what a speaker can deliver as against what your objectives of the conference are. So that's one thing. Whether it's keynotes or even workshop speakers, it's the same thing. I've got a bunch of them, so what do you really know about your particular topic at hand? So for mine, it's strategy and business growth and all that kind of stuff. And if the answer is, well, read all my books, review my published research, and here are some example consulting clients, you probably know that they're an expert. Okay. That's, what did you do before? Malcolm Gladwell famously said that to become an expert, you need what, 10,000 hours doing something. I remember years ago, I went to a presentation on social media, and I've written a book on that, so I kind of wanted to see what somebody else was saying. And what did they do before social media? Well, they were a Y2K consultant. What they do before then? They sold real estate. What did they do before then? They sold vacuum cleaners. So that's not what I call, an expert or you've got to have a certain longevity to truly become it. Um, sometimes you want to see whether the person's a thought leader or not. And I don't call myself a thought leader, by the way. I call myself no, I call myself somebody who's got a lot of expertise. Other people may use those terms for me, but I don't particularly, right? So, what is there a long history of creating completely new intellectual property? Is there net new thinking on a particular topic? Do they have a long history of creating all this net new stuff? I've got over 1,000 articles and videos and white papers and everything on all that kind of stuff. I think this is pretty cool. I think it's also cool because um, it means it's a lot easier that you as a meeting planner can say, hey, are any of those things appropriate for our people? Can you write some newsletter articles for us, beforehand or afterwards? Or is there a white paper that you can customize for us? I just think that becomes a very deep well. And certainly if somebody's asking you questions, okay, whether it's in the hallway or if you're doing a hot seat on the stage, you actually have a fair amount of depth. I think that's actually pretty important. What do others say, about you? They read, certainly reading the any references or testimonials. I think it's interesting, to ask the question, how have you been recognized for the impact that you've made? You know, by third parties, not by yourself. So for me, I'm in the Speaking Hall of Fame. I'm a fellow certified management consultant, a few other things as well. Griner Award from CSAE for my impact on that sector. So, are there third party recognitions? And by the way, do you do you actually have some qualifications in there? What letters do you have after your name, right? Do you have like detailed letters and education in the particular area that you've got? Right? And all these things are indicators. I think there's two other things as well. These aren't questions per se, but something that you can easily ask. Number one is, what will you do before the event itself? Because if you answer that, then if the answer is, well, here's all the preparation I do, and here's all the things I can help you with marketing, and here's how easy I can make your job. And I talked about the movie promo, the video promo, maybe the webinar, all these kinds of things beforehand. Then ask, okay, what would you do afterwards? Well, maybe it's writing the articles, or maybe it's a webinar replay, or maybe it's a one-page reference sheet, or maybe it's online resources, or maybe it's books at a different, whatever it happens to be. If you're able to ask those questions about the before and after, what's not usually good is when a speaker flies in, does their thing, and 10 minutes after they've done their presentation, they're flying out. Thank you for hiring me. No, I think that there's a bit of a longer cycle, okay, and in terms of the roadmap of learning that's possible, right? And so if you ask those questions, not just about the person's qualifications and everything, you'll probably be able to weed out. Oh, and you should also ask this, are you selling from the stage? Do you have stuff to sell, right? And if the answer is, oh my, I do, by the way, then you could dig into a bit deeper. So I've written 8 books, right? So oftentimes people will say, um, we'll buy a book for everybody in the audience. And if not that, they'll say, well, you know something, if people want a book, they could sell, you can sign them at the back and they get a special price or something. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you're actually trying to sell something from the stage, you want to make sure that that's not what you're looking to get.
Talk to me about backup plans. Murphy's Law is that if something can go wrong, it will. Talk to me about like what plan Bs conference organizers need to have, maybe specifically around their speakers, if that's your experience or in general. Um, let's hear.
Oh, gee, I'll talk about plan B for me. Okay, so what are the biggest stresses? Okay, everything's in place, and all of a sudden, the meeting planner gets a call from, say, speaker saying, "I'm so sorry, I'm sick in the hospital. I just am not able to actually show up. I'm just not going to be there." Or the airplane hasn't left yet, and I'm not going to be there for the opening keynote. Or anything else where all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, I thought that everything was all set. And so one of the things you can do is you can say, well, please fly in the night before. If the plane gets canceled, at least there's likely an early morning flight as a backup, right? If somebody's in the hospital, if somebody's going to be late, you can reorganize a little bit the schedule. It's a pain in the butt, but still it can be done. But what happens if somebody doesn't show up? I can't tell you how many times the meeting planner has said, Randall, so-and-so hasn't shown up. Do you think that you could do a presentation on such and such or such and such in their stead? And for me, the answer is always yes, if that's in my area of expertise. And the reason why is because all the research that goes in, all of the interviews with audience members, with volunteer leaders, committee members, executive directors, management teams, all that work has been done, right? All the industry knowledge, it's all there already. So it's just a question of saying, okay, sure, let me take one of my presentations, and it might be an all-nighter on my part, but you know what? Let's do a whole customization because you can deliver it because you've done all the work beforehand. It's very stressful because you haven't done as much rehearsals you might normally do, but on the other hand, you can help out, right? And so I've been asked that many times. I'm happy to do it. Most people are. Excuse me. So that's the plan B. From my perspective, it's interesting. I've got a particular clicker that I like. Okay, it's got a timer in it at 5 minutes. By the end of my presentation, it vibrates in my hand, so I could tell that I've got 5 minutes left. It's very important to actually end when you're officially supposed to end. And so I love this clicker. It's a very expensive one, and so it's very interesting. There's a little widget that I gotta plug into the computer, so when I'm doing the presentation, this remote can actually communicate with my computer. So what's interesting here is that I was at a national professional service firm hired me to do a cross-country series of keynotes for their new senior managers all across the country. And in one of the cities, the meeting planner decided, or maybe it was the AV person, decided that they would take out the little widget, the little dongle out of my computer because guess what? They had the same one. So I hopped on a plane to go into that next city. And lo and behold, I didn't have the dongle because the helpful person took it. So, you know, part of the thing is to say, well, what can I do to make sure that there's always a plan B? So guess what? Two clickers is an example. You know, two HDMI cables is an example. A copy of my presentation on the computer and also up in Dropbox in the cloud, right? All these kinds of things are what, you know, you can ask your speakers to make sure that they do beforehand. Um, One of the things that sometimes meeting planners or AV people ask is please send your proposal the day before. That way it can be loaded on the system and it's easier. And if it's absolutely necessary, you know, absolutely will. But what invariably happens is the fonts don't match, and you get some weird formatting because the fonts are all different, right? And uh, the thing is it needs significant work, and so, you know, it might seem like a good idea, but sometimes it isn't, right? So long as you make sure that the rehearsals with the speakers and the AV happen early enough so that those kinds of things can, you know, solve themselves, if you will, it becomes an awful lot easier to avoid the problems. So
I had a thought, Randall, when I asked you about what are the questions to ask your keynote speakers, and you asked about their experience and longevity and the impact they've had and how they've been recognized. You know, we've seen hundreds of forums for speakers. And oddly enough, I can't say that those stand out as, you know, given questions that are asked. But what is almost always asked is, on that question, we're going to pause right here on this part 2 of conference planning. We'll pick up with more Q&A in part 3. And if anything we talked about so far resonates with you, if you'd like our insights on how we would put together an agenda or plan for an amazing conference or event, do reach out. We'd be happy to share resources and have a conversation. You can email us at info@randallcraig.com or book a call with us at www.randallcraig.net/30, and we'll see you back for part 3.